Greet me quickly, you people. That's what I do. Artisha.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are tuned us from. My name is Lucy Wanjiko, and I take this time to welcome you to our first webinar this year. On behalf of Wild Animal Protection, I extend this special invite and welcome to you. Today's topic is trading to extinction, just coming a day before World Wildlife Day, which is celebrated tomorrow. Thank you for taking time to be with us. I promise you that we will make it worth the while. I can see we have people from all across. I have noted we have Philippines, we have Uganda, we have South Africa, we have Canada, and I'm sure many more will join us. So feel at home here as we delve into this conversation. But before we do that, we'll have a poll. We will project a poll and you'll take the poll, and after that, I'll share the poll on my screen. Thank you. Please take the poll. We have the first question on the screen. Trading animals as commodity is not necessary. Just choose one. The first one is I agree, I disagree, I have no opinion. Select one choice. As we do that, let's have the next question, please. Thank you. That's the end of the poll. Thank you. I'll be sharing the polls at some time into the webinar. Okay, we have the opening poll. Second question now is up on the screen. And is on trophy hunting. Trophy hunting is inhumane and serves no conservation purpose. A single choice again. Please pick one. We'll be sharing the poll results towards the end of the webinar. I hope you have taken the poll 1 and poll 2, so we can now begin. As we start, remember to join our movement. That is people working together to make a world a better place for animals. You can join us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Yes, we are now on LinkedIn, so please, you can join us there. And we will have our Twitter handles and social media handles on our comment section. So they'll be put up there. Remember to type in your question on the Q&A. And should you have any comments, suggestions, please just type them on the chat. We will endeavor to respond to all questions and chats at the end of the presentation. Small housekeeping for journalists and the press on this call. We will have a special 15 minutes for one-on-one dedicated time with our panelists. So please, if you have a question or you want a B-roll or you want a special interview or a soundbite with our panelists, we will have that section 15 minutes at the end of the webinar, specially dedicated to journalists who want to have a chat with them. So please stay on the line after the main presentation. And remember to type your Q&A, any question you have, any suggestions, and also tell us where you are joining us from at the comments section. I'll be sampling some of those comments and some of the locations that are presented here on the webinar at the end of the webinar. Please type in where you are joining us from. We'd love to hear from you. Also remember to indicate your name and the email address so that you can receive the presentations after this webinar. Just to mention that we are also live on Facebook and live on our YouTube page. So if you have people who are not able to join through the Zoom, you can also request them to join us on YouTube or Facebook. We are live on those two channels. All right. Now, tomorrow is Thursday, March 3rd, which marks the World Wildlife Day, a day to celebrate and raise awareness of the world's wild animals and plants. This year's theme is recovering key species for ecosystem restoration. That is recovering key species for ecosystem restoration. These celebrations will seek to draw attention to the conservation status of some of the most critically endangered species of wild fauna and flora, and to drive discussions towards imagining and implementing solutions to conserve them. All conversations in this webinar today will be inspired by and seek to inform efforts towards the achievement of UN Sustainable Development Goals. Here in Africa and globally, wild animals suffer immensely through people's actions, and their numbers in the wild have been plummeting. Part of it is as a result of global wildlife trade, which Wild Animal Protection is passionate about and is campaigning against. Ahead of this significant day, here at Wild Animal Protection, we have decided to look at this problem, that is global wildlife trade. We are looking at this problem today. We are measuring the progress and having conversation on the progress we have made, and really looking for solutions on what's to be done, what needs to be done to end this cruelty. My passion to you is as we engage, let's have discussions, open discussions on what we need to do as people, as supporters, as people who are passionate about preserving our wildlife and ensuring that generations share and enjoy the future just as we did. With us today are two panelists. Today we have a special webinar. We are moving from what we have done before, because for the first time we have two panelists, Dr. Patrick Muinde, who is Wild Animal Protection's research manager based in Africa. He is a veterinary doctor and a research expert by professional with years of experience in research and hands-on work. Patrick Muinde is joining us from here, Nairobi, Kenya, and he leads our research docket. Joining us from Kampala is our sister, Edith Kavesime, who is our wildlife campaigns manager. She's a seasoned expert in wildlife and wildlife conservation. You will find a few wildlife around her home just to showcase how passionate she is in the work that she does. Please help me welcome our two panelists, Dr. Patrick Muinde and Edith, to kick us off with the presentation. We will start with Dr. Muinde. Over to you.
Thank you, Lucy, for that introduction. As you rightly put it, tomorrow is World Wildlife Day. It's a big day in the continent and also globally, because it's a day that we use to create awareness and to promote wildlife conservation. Just a minute, working to, yeah, so we'll be talking where we are currently in terms of wildlife conservation. As you know, we have been advocating for protection of animals for quite some long time. And what drives us is the current situation that we are globally. We have seen wildlife being exploited in a number of ways. People are keeping wildlife at homes. Others are keeping trophies in their homes, being hung on their walls or used as mats. And of course, we have seen people going to wildlife conservancies, going to wildlife habitats to hunt and kill animals just for prestige. So those are some of the key things which are threatening wildlife at the moment. And today we'll be talking about trading to extinction. Trading basically are activities that are involved in buying and selling of goods and services. And extinction, as you all know, is gone and gone forever. Is where you have the last member of a given species dies. For example, you have read stories about dinosaurs, which used to be here, mammoths, and even other species which are no longer in this world. So those are some of the key things that we'll be talking today with my colleague Edith. Starting from where we are World Animal Protection, and our mission is we move the world to protect animals, and our vision is a world where animals live free from cruelty and suffering. We move the world to protect animals with physical offices in 15 countries, but active in more than 50 countries globally. We work with business entities, corporates, governments to help people come up with practical ways to prevent animal suffering and cruelty. And currently, we're working to deliver on our new strategy, which is spanning from 2021 to 2030, where we are looking at two key goals. First one, to ensure that farmed animals live good lives. And we will only achieve that if we transform the current global food systems. The other goal is to stop wild animals exploitation. And basically, to stop that, we have to view animals in another angle, not just as commodities. And we'll do that by changing systems that allow that exploitation. To start with, globally, almost half of the world's population is in social media. It's key to highlight that because it's in social media where buyers meet sellers. It's in social media where people look for information on how or where to buy a wild animal or its derivative. And this is expanding as internet connectivity expands, as population expands. We expect social media users to grow equally. Global estimates of wildlife trade is estimated to be up to $42 billion annually, of which majority of that is illegal. And Africa is home to world's most iconic species. When you talk about elephants, lions, buffaloes, you'll find them in Africa. And equally, when you talk of species that we call them less charismatic, for example, scorpions, tortoises, you also find them in plenty in Africa. And equally, we have rich ecosystems. We have coastal environments, we have savanna grasslands, we have tropical forests, we have rich marine environments and all that. So Africa is heritage to wildlife as well as their habitats. But equally, trade of wild animals and their derivatives is happening at scale. For example, up to 1.6 trillion wild animals are killed and suffer from people's actions every year. We looked at CITES data between 2011 to 2015. We looked at CITES data between 2011 to 2015, and we were able to find that 1.2 million skins. And in this case, we presumed each skin presented an individual animals were traded just to be used as mats or to be hung on a wall or those kind of, or to be used as a covers for covers for seats. And again, 1.5 million live animals were legally exported for exotic pet trade. When we talk about exotic pets, these are animals which have not been domesticated before, and therefore they still have those wild characteristics. This is just a snapshot of our findings, which highlights Africa's most traded species for exotic pet market. In this data of 2011 to 2015, we found that ball python was the most traded species, with up to more than 500,000 snakes traded, most of them coming from wildlife and ranching facilities. Then that was followed by African gray parrot, which is the most traded bird. And again, most of it came from captivity. There's a lot of breeding of African gray parrots in South Africa. But again, wildlife was also a major source. For example, in Congo, where poaching cases have been reported. Of course, you'll find other species like emperor scorpion, in which most of it was sourced from the wild, leopard tortoise, and savanna monitor lizards. These are top 5 species that are traded from Africa to supply exotic pet market. As an organization, we developed this map. Basically, this is a global wildlife trade map, and it shows how different wildlife species are being moved from one location to another. And basically, we are shipping animals every day to everywhere. We are shipping animals to totally new environmental niche. And this is an indicator that every single day, dozens of animals are poached or are farmed to supply this global multi-billion industry. And this is not only cruel, but also it impacts on the animals themselves, but also it is dangerous and devastating to our people and environment. Looking at some of the key drivers of the trade, when you look at important countries, their beliefs in medicinal and health values. There is a big demand for traditional Chinese medicine currently, and animal parts are being used to feed that industry. If you talk about lion bones, pangolin scales, rhino horns, and many other species are being killed to supply that market. There's affirmation of status. People are keeping exotic pets at home because they feel it's fancy. They feel they'll be associated with a given class when they showcase themselves taking care of an animal in their homes. Then online marketing, which I talked about. We are posting a lot of video interacting with animals in not so good way in social media. And those who visit those sites, they think it's fancy and they go to look for one to keep at home. Trophy hunting is another big issue. People are coming to Africa to pay dozens of dollars so that they can be able to kill an elephant, a lion, or any other animal. Then there's opportunistic buying and gift giving, which is quite common. You just pass across, you saw an animal, then you buy to keep it at home. Then looking at exporting countries, which basically is Africa. Criminal cartels to finance illegal activities is happening. For example, those who follow news recently, there's a rebel group in Congo, which basically held one of the endangered species of pangolin, and it's demanding a ransom to be given some money so that they are able to release that endangered pangolin species. So that is happening. It's the first time an animal is being held ransom, and a group is asking for money to release it to the world. And again, income generation. African countries are seeing wildlife trade as a source of revenue, and that is sustaining trade to go on. Then unstable governments, corruption, which is big in Africa and also in some other parts of the world. When you are importing or exporting, you corrupt papers and all that. There's lack of alternative economic opportunities. And again, challenges in law enforcement. We have some very good laws, but to enforce them is a challenge on our side. Basically, this slide is to show different categories or different ways in which these animals are traded to. For example, on your top left, that is a skull of lion. As I mentioned, lions are killed to supply high demand of lion bones for traditional Chinese medicine. Then the photo below that is African grey pearl. It's a pangolin, which basically is being prepared for scales extraction. Again, those scales are used for traditional Asian medicine. On top right, that's an example of African grey parrot in captivity in somebody's home. You can see how it has plucked off its feathers. First, because it's stressed. Second, because you cannot meet you cannot meet the needs of that bird. In the world, it feeds on variety of fruits and seeds, but when you bring it home, you're not able to provide that. So many times these birds suffer from hypocalcemia, they develop weak bones, and many other conditions associated with poor nutrition. The last photo is a photo of ball python. This is a morph of ball python, which has been genetically modified, but the parent stock comes from Africa, predominantly West Africa, where they export and earn just a few dollars, but when it gets to destination countries like US, you get thousands of US dollars. So this is just an example of how crazy people have become and how they are misusing wildlife. The key question is, why is this trade an issue? Are there some things which you need to discuss and to highlight to show why this trade is an issue? We start with conservation. Wildlife trade really threatens conservation. First, because we lack scientific data on wildlife population. We don't know the number of some species that are left in the world. The population is unknown, or either it's declining, and again, conservation status is not known. Therefore, you can keep on harvesting these animals from the world up to a point where you will not have any left. For example, I can use the example of ball pythons. They are they are poached, and we don't know the current status of wildlife population of those snakes in the world. Then one might argue most of the source is ranching systems or ranching facilities. But we ought to remember that these ranches are sustained by wild-sourced animals for breeding stock. The ranches go for pregnant females in the natural habitats in the forest. They bring them to the breeding facilities. After giving birth, they should take them back to the wild. But does that happen? And that is clear indicator that ranches, as much as we say they are coming from ranching facilities, these ranches are still sustained by wild population. And again, another issue is about invasive species. We are taking species from Africa to other continents, to other countries, and that in a way is causing population dynamics in those new countries or other new environments. Again, genetic pollution, as I mentioned, the case of ball pythons. Once the pregnant one gives birth, you should take it to where you took it from the wild, but that does not happen. When you are done with it, you just most likely you'll take it back to the nearest area, and that will cause gene pollution in that specific area. And again, most of inbreeding that is seen in captive facilities, when you consider lion, basically causes a lot of genetic pollution, and most of the young ones are born with disabilities. Again, some species that are involved in trade, for example, tattoos and tortoises, they are vulnerable to exploitation. First, because they take long to mature. Okay, they have got late maturity, and to add on top of that, they have low reproductive output. Therefore, that species to populate again, to reproduce again, to regain their world population, it will take long time. Again, if you look at animal welfare aspect of the trade causes immense suffering. And with that, I mean the chain is cruel in all stages of it. For example, from capture, from restraining, transportation, and subsequent life in captivity. For example, if I talk about capture, how they did for African grey parrots. Basically, they paint trees with the glue-like substance. Then they have one bird tied close to that tree. And when that bird screeches, these birds will fly to come to investigate what is happening to one of their birds. And with that, they'll perch on that tree where they'll get stuck. The poachers will forcefully prick out those birds from branches where they are stuck, and where many of them get injuries and even many die in the process. Again, in captivity or in breeding facilities, these animals are kept in barren, overcrowded conditions. Their breeding conditions where they live is quite bad. It's barren floor, it's overcrowded, it's filthy, and all bad characteristics that you can think of, you'll find them in those breeding facilities. Looking at welfare scores, that is in terms of provision of shelter, of water, and appropriate space. That lacks across when that animal species is captured, when it's transported, and even sometimes in the captivity. For example, a photo there of African spurred tortoise being shipped in a container. You can tell that tortoise can hardly extend its head. And it will be in that position for a number of days. And that is just an example of how limited space these animals live in when they're being transported. Again, in the destination countries, that is in the consumer nations, the owners are not fully aware of their welfare needs. And with that, I mean, you have a bird there, you don't know how to take care of it. You have a python there, you don't know what to feed it. You will try to go to internet to look for some information about that, but you'll find limited information. Or rather, you'll go to social media, you look at comments, you look at the comment section, but most of the information that you'll find there will mislead you. So we lack enough information on how to better provide for these animals adequately. And again, the chain is associated with high mortalities. You see an example of African grey parrot. Studies have shown between that to 60% die from the point of capture to the destination. So that means if you have 10 birds, 6 of them will die, only 4 of them will make it to the lifetime of captivity. Currently, we have in COVID, okay? And wildlife trade is a public health risk. And with that, we can use a few scientific proven data. For example, 60% of emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic. With the zoonotic, I mean, these are diseases that can be transmitted from humans to animals. And again, 70% of emerging diseases are thought to originate from wildlife. So any new disease that we are going to experience in the future, chances are 70% will be coming from wildlife. There are 2 photos there, one on your right, on your left, which basically is a photo taken at a wildlife market in Asian country. Then on your right is a photo taken in West Africa in a wildlife market, commonly known as Voodoo market. What you can see here, for example, the photo on your left, you have different species kept together. You have monkeys on top. On the bottom, you have bats. On the left, you have civet cats. Then on the right, you have birds. You can imagine a pathogen being passed from one species to another, mutating, and subsequently spilling over to humans. The same case applies to the photo on the right, where you can see the head of monkey. There are birds there, there are snakes there. So basically that presents a good concoction for pathogens or organisms to emerge and spread. I'm using this photo just to emphasize more because of our current situation of COVID-19. Some species that are involved in trade have played a key role in previous pandemics. For example, from flu pandemics from 1918 to 1970. H1N1, H2N2 viruses, which have been associated with the avian species. Then again, you know about HIV in 1981. SARS-CoV-1, which was in 2002 to 2003. Again, it was associated with civet monkeys. Recently, Ebola is associated with primates and bats. Then in 2015, we had MERS, Middle East respiratory syndrome, which is associated with camels. But science shows that camels might have acquired it long time ago from bats. The current situation of COVID, of course, a lot of research is still ongoing, but it's thought to have originated from wildlife. So basically, this is just to show how previous pandemics have been associated with wildlife, and what you're going to see in future, 70% most likely will have animal or wildlife origin. Last year, we launched a report entitled Cargo of Cruelty. And basically in that report showed that high-risk mammals are still being shipped from Africa. Okay, from that, from the 3 photos there, you'll see civet monkeys, civet cats, monkeys, and bats. These are photos of these animals in shipping containers. Okay, and basically what this photo tells you is that we are transporting dangerous pathogens to other countries. If this continues, don't be shocked if we get another pandemic in the near future. Briefly, I'll touch on some recent national and global events that have happened, touching on wildlife. For example, just a few days to this webinar and to tomorrow's World Wildlife Day, on 15th February 2022, Namibia announced that it's going to export wild-caught elephants to a lifetime of captivity. And in fact, the ministry went ahead to confirm that 7 elephants have been captured and 22 of them are waiting to be exported. And they are still going to capture more in the world. Okay. Of course, currently it's not clear where these elephants are being exported to. There are some they could be going to United Arab Emirates, but of course that is conservation of CITES because that is non-rare countries for that species. From 2010 to 2015, Africa has exported a total of 104 wild-caught elephants. Majority came from Zimbabwe and Namibia. The bad thing is that there are some deaths which were associated with that trade, 22 of them being presumed to be dead. Again, recently there was uproar in Brazil, whereby 3 out of 18 giraffes died after being imported from South Africa. On the same, recently in Tanzania, we saw there was an attempt to evict the Maasai community from their traditional land just to create more space for traditional hunting. I know currently there's a petition going around that. And again, KQ announced that it will stop transporting monkeys from Mauritius to the US after an accident that happened in which some monkeys died, others survived, but unfortunately they had to be killed because of public health risk. We had good news from Olpajita, whereby Biorescue Consortium created 2 new northern white rhino embryos, bringing a total to 14. Of course, this is a big milestone for us, but where we are coming in as an organization is that we should not go to such an extent. You can imagine the number of efforts, the number of finances, and the level of anxiety to ensure survival of northern white rhinos in the globe. Last year, South Africa embarked on a journey to phase out its commercial captive breeding of lions and trade in their parts. We worked with our partner organization, Blood Lions down there, and other organizations to erase the fate that lions go down there in South Africa. And we're happy South Africa is taking such a noble step to stop cruelty in breeding farms. But again, when you look at parrots, African grey parrot, breeding is still happening in large scale. We have more than 1,600 breeding facilities, which are churning out birds for global pet industry. And again, recent news is that South Africa has issued new hunting and export quotas for elephants, leopards, and rhinos. And we're asking, that's not the way to go. We need to stop exploiting wildlife in all means. Lucy talked about tomorrow, which is big day on World Wildlife Day, a day that we used to commemorate and promote awareness of wild fauna and flora. Of course, we have quite ambitious theme, recovering key species for ecosystem restoration. But again, with all that, millions, billions of animals suffer at the hands of humans around the world as a result of this needless trade. I know one might argue that it's legal. Anyway, it's happening, it's legal, but does legality matter? And from this point, I'll ask my colleague Edith to join us to take us through legality aspect of it. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, of course, good evening, everyone, wherever you're joining us from. So thank you, my colleague Minde, for taking us through the first part of this presentation. I'll carry on from this point up to the end. And I'll be looking at the question around legalities. Really, does legality matter? This is the topic I'll be talking about from now and on in the next slides. You know, our experience has shown that wherever we have campaigns targeting different players in the wildlife trade industry, and all the players, other players in the sector, be it the traders themselves, be it the corporates like the travel industry that fuels this exploitation, the feedback we have always received is that this is legal. And we insist that even if it's legal, it does not really make it right, because really the legal does not matter. Because whether legal or illegal, the trade is really not really distinguishable, because we know the fact that usually animals in the legal, that are traded illegally come from the wild, and sometimes these are really poached. So really the relationship between legal and illegal is quite complex, and therefore really very hard to establish. And of course, wildlife trade can be legal, but illegal, or even a combination of those, depending on the species, it's really difficult kind of distinguish them as species move through the trade chain. And in fact, some, if not even most of the species found in the trade are not even currently regulated, especially under CITES. And some of them, of course, are not even listed in the IUCN red data list. Therefore, we actually do not know their status in the wild. Some of the shipments sometimes even lack the required permits. And sometimes even if the permit is there, you cannot establish the authenticity of some of those permits, because there have been also cases where these permits are actually are forged. And maybe perhaps we hope that now that this CITES has moved from paper-based certificates to e-based certificates, maybe that will be addressed. But of course, that does not take away the fact that wildlife trade in itself is inherently inhumane to the animals that involved. I want to take an example. If we are looking at, say, lions which are held in captivity in South Africa, does CITES really zoom into to make sure that those lions where they are forced, their conditions are the right conditions, are appropriate? Because what happens in the CITES trade mechanism, it's only like international borders where CITES requires minimum delays and proper care for these animals. But what takes place out there in the facilities is all left to the countries where these wild animals are being farmed. So it's like, it doesn't matter what happens to these animals in the facilities, as long as there are no delays at the international borders, then for CITES, that's okay. And then if we are talking about IATA, this is the aviation industry, an association that brings together the aviation industry players. Sometimes when you talk to guys who are in the aviation industry, they'll tell you it's not our role to ensure that these animals, wherever they are coming from, are properly looked after. And it's also not their responsibility in terms of where these animals are going. So they will tell you, for us, we make sure that these animals are properly shipped, and we make as much as possible ensure that there are no delays, they are properly packaged. But even from the pictures that my colleague, Dr. Minde, has just shared, you can see that actually even the shipping containers are so small to an extent that these animals cannot extend their bodies. And of course, these are very arduous journeys from Africa to the destinations where these animals are going. So I think it's like hiding our heads in the sand, especially for the aviation industry, to just say for us, we are playing our role, the rest we leave it to the government. And we have gotten those, we have really received those kind of lame excuses, which we think the aviation industry has a real control that they should really worry and should really be concerned where these animals are coming from, but also where they are going. Because as a player in the middle of the chain, it's like they are telling us it is okay as long as for us we are playing our part. Really, being legal does not make it right. And I want to use again the example of South Africa. CITES allows countries to export. Yeah, CITES allows countries to export, for instance, South Africa to export bones of lions bred in captivity, as long as the country has set its quota and it has communicated it to CITES. But what has been happening inside South Africa for many years in this industry is kind of CITES has always kept a blind eye. And as my colleague has mentioned, last year, after a lot of pressure, South Africa on its own decided that it will close down the captive lion breeding industry. So whereas from the CITES perspective, it's legal to trade in lion bones, export them as long as they are from captive bred facilities, it's like, it's okay because that's what the law says. But from an animal welfare perspective, it's not right. You can as well equate it to wildlife trade, to human trade, those days when people are being traded as slaves. The law allowed people to be traded as slaves. And anyone would say, but this is legal. And it's exactly the same thing we are saying, because it's legal, then it's okay. But of course, as wild animal protection, we are saying, even when it's legal, being legal does not make it right. The whole system is murky and broken. We know it is marred with corruption, it's marred with animals being stolen from the wild and they feed the breeding facilities, and really the monitoring at that point is almost not there. So it's like once the animals are in the captive facilities, they are being exported. It's okay, we can say it's okay, but it isn't. If we are talking about, my colleague talked about the elephants and other species that have been captured from the wild. For instance, the elephants that are being captured from the wild. There's a lot of secrecy. For instance, around the frequent capture of wild animals out of Africa and being exported. And of course, this is in contradiction of CITES rules and exposes the lack of accountability and transparency. And of course, certainly this spells doom for Africa's wildlife and puts our lives in danger, puts our economies in danger because of all the challenges and problems that come with trade in wildlife and transporting our wildlife into places that where they are not supposed to be. So in conclusion, I would like to highlight a few actions which would like, or which we would like really some of these players in the chain think about and take. Because if wildlife shipping continues, certainly Africa is at risk of irreversible ecological collapse. And this will impact on not only on our economies, but also on the livelihoods of the people. A report by the UN, which was released, I think in 2019 or 2020, it actually pointed out that many countries, that a fifth of the countries in the world are already experiencing ecological collapse. And one of the countries that have been singled out, especially on the African continent, is South Africa, which we know very well is one of those countries where wildlife is now being farmed as if these are domestic animals. The other countries that have been highlighted that are facing ecological collapse or at the risk of ecological collapse is Kenya. Again, we know Kenya is one of those countries where this wildlife farming is allowed, and this is impacting on the natural ecosystem, and certainly it's not natural to farm wildlife as commodities or as domestic animals. This wildlife trade, as we have mentioned, is certainly a risk for disasters because animals usually in this kind of environments, they are usually in unsanitary conditions, and we face the risk of pathogens crossing from wildlife to ourselves. And then, of course, the spillover that comes with that, and the risks like COVID-19 that we are currently experiencing. For the last 2 years, we've had our mouths shut with face masks, just because we've broken that relationship between ourselves and the natural world, which of course we need to rebuild at this point in time if we must build back better. Would like to compel the aviation industry to fulfill social responsibility and obligations and act to safeguard the world against the next pandemic. Because being legal, as I said, is not necessarily correct and it's not right. In fact, about 3 years ago, we worked with the Turkish Airlines when we highlighted to them that actually African grey parrots were being shipped from the DRC on their planes to other destinations across the globe. And they were really receptive. They worked with us. They acknowledged this was an anomaly in their transportation procedures, and they committed. And I think since then they have ceased transporting live African grey parrots on their planes. The same should happen. We know, for instance, there have been many airlines that ship, for instance, lion bones from South Africa to the rest of the world, especially the Asian countries. We know a number of airlines ship live ball pythons from especially West Africa to the rest of the world, especially the US. And Turkish Airlines led the way. And we believe these other airlines could also take a leaf from those other airlines, and then take a leaf from the Turkish and stop shipping wildlife across the world and end the suffering of these animals. But we also need to move people from dependency on wildlife as a source of income, to move them from exploitation to really go into other ways of earning a living without exploiting wild animals. But we also need, as governments need to enforce and strengthen cross-border monitoring and enforcement of the law so that cross-border poaching and transportation of wildlife is brought to an end. And lastly, tomorrow is World Wildlife Day. CITES is an international mechanism that regulates trade in endangered species of plants and animals. So how can we celebrate this day when on a daily basis, on a yearly basis, thousands and thousands, and of course trillions yearly of animals are being exploited just to serve human needs, which are actually needless. So we call upon CITES to scrap export quotas for most of the species. And we really want to highlight that South Africa has led the way to actually acknowledge that the lion-born export quota is unnecessary and it's taking steps to scrap it. So I think this is a signal to CITES that actually this is needless and other countries can do the same. And that provision should be scrapped from the CITES trade rules. Reflecting on this year's theme, recovering species for ecosystem restoration, we would like to highlight CITES that, and of course the governments that are party to this convention, that wild animals are sentient beings. This means animals can feel, they have emotions like us, and they are individuals in their own right, whether big or small, whether in plenty or endangered, they all deserve the right to life in the wild, not to be traded as just mere commodities. When we talk of key species, the connotation is that other species perhaps don't matter. But as World Animal Protection, we insist that each and every species matter and each and every animal matter because each animal plays a critical role in its own, its own right and in the environment for the health of our planet, and of course has the right to live in the wild. So any trade, whether illegal, it's inherently cruel and puts our health at risk and of course our economies. And it is high time that CITES and the entire world and the parties that are signatory to CITES really recognize that wild animals are not commodities. And as I said, South Africa has taken a firm stand. It has demonstrated that export quotas can be scrapped, and we compel CITES to remove that provision from its books. I'd like to end here and hand over back the mic to the moderator for the remaining parts of our webinar. Thank you, colleagues and friends, for listening to me.
All right, indeed, wildlife belongs to the wild, and wildlife is not a commodity and should not be used for entertainment. They should remain at their natural habitat. Thank you, Edith and Dr. Muida, for the very insightful presentation. Very, very engaging. I can see we have a few questions, which we want now to go into as the second session of this webinar. My fellow participants, you've heard it. We now take the questions. You've heard the presentations. So please, if you have any question, I want to urge you to type it in the Q&A box, and also on the comments, we'll be able to answer at least most of them. Just for the record, we have over 50 people on this call, and I've counted about 13 nationalities. So please, I know there are many more nationalities. Perhaps you have not typed in your name. We still want to know your name and where you are joining us from. So please type in your Q&A and also the comments. We have a question. So we have at least 3 questions for Edith and Dr. Muinde. The first question is from Rupi Mangat. Rupi Mangat, she says, I did not know that Kenya is number 2 after South Africa in ecological collapse, and that Kenya farms animals for wildlife trade. Please confirm. Rupi Mangat, and thank you, Rupi. You have been our great supporter. She asked, I did not know that Kenya is number 2 after South Africa in ecological collapse, and that Kenya farms animals for wildlife trade. Please confirm. So that question will be answered by Edith. And Edith, you can take the next question as well, which is a question from Kosom Safania Yunana from Nigeria. He says, all hands must be on the deck to combat poverty in most African countries in order to reduce pressure on biodiversity. What are your comments around that? That is the relationship between poverty and the pressure that human beings are putting on biodiversity. So those 2 questions, one from Nigeria and the other one from Kenya by Rupi Magat. Edith, you take those 2 questions as we wait for more. Then Patrick will take the ones as they come. Edith, over to you.
Can you repeat this, Lucy?
The 2 questions?
The second one.
The second one is a question from Kosom Safania Yunana from Podcourt, Nigeria. All hands, he says, all hands must be on the desk to combat poverty in most African countries in order to reduce pressure on biodiversity. It's actually a statement, but you can give your comments around this. The relationship between poverty and the pressure on biodiversity in Africa.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy, for those questions. And of course, Johanna, I will start with Johanna's question or comment. Yeah, of course, indeed, wildlife exploitation is in part driven by poverty, and of course, really it's about people looking for alternatives and people's quest find what to live on as income. Africa, of course, is one of the continents where poverty is widespread and people look at natural resources, including wildlife, as a source of livelihoods. There are many angles to that in terms of how to combat that. There is need, of course, for inter-sectoral coordination to ensure that poverty is approached from different angles. Of course, certainly us who are in the wildlife sector, we have a role to play, but of course, there are also subsectors like agriculture, education, and others that should play a role in terms of really making people come out of poverty. Yeah, you can imagine if people had skills, were educated, were engaged in some very productive employment, how that would impact on wildlife. So I did agree with him that in part we need to address poverty in order to move people away from livelihoods that are dependent on natural resources or on wildlife as the way of living. But also, this is also not to say that we cannot combat poverty by engaging people in non-consumptive ways of depending on wildlife. Ecotourism, for instance, is one of those approaches or tools that can be used to combat poverty, really where people can, instead of extracting wild animals from the wild as commodities, would rather engage in ecotourism-based approaches that leave wild animals to remain in the wild, but also generate some livable income for people. On the second question about Kenya being one of those countries that is experiencing ecological collapse, this is a report which was published, I think, last year, no, 2019 or 2020. I need to cross-check that, but I can avail it to you after this webinar. Indeed, in Africa that are experiencing ecological collapse, one of them is, of course, Kenya, and South Africa is top on the list. The other countries that have been listed is Nigeria, and I think Egypt. In fact, if you look at those countries, those are some of the countries we'd actually say these are that have achieved middle income status. And we know what comes with middle income status. Resources, it's exploitation of wild animals. And recently, Kenya was in the process of revising their new wildlife law, and wildlife farming and keeping wild animals out of the wild as farmed animals is one of those things that have been is being endorsed, and we think it's scary and it's concerning that we are heading in that direction. It will be a pity if Kenya also goes into the direction of now getting these animals out of the farms and selling them. Of course, currently, Kenya is not one of those countries that significantly engages in exporting, trading actually animals from the wild. But of course, if you're taking animals from the wild and you're farming them, it's likely that the next step will be, now let's start exporting these animals. And we believe that is a wrong precedent, it's a wrong road that the country is taking. Let Kenya continue to be known as a country that is known for nature-based tourism, not where animals are taken from their natural environments and they are being farmed for other purposes other than ecotourism.
Okay, thank you, Edith. We now turn over to Dr. Mwinde. Dr. Mwinde, I'll read just about 3 questions for you that we have on the screen from our participants, and 1 question from our Facebook page. So this question is from Gabriela, all the way from Philippines. I'm a student from the Philippines. Thank you, Gabriela, for joining us. In what ways can I help support the initiative to stop animals from being treated to extinction? So Gabriela asked, I am a student from the Philippines. In what ways can I help support the initiative to stop animals from being traded to extinction? The next question for you, Dr. Mwinde, comes from Edwin Keegan. Edwin Keegan from Nairobi. He asks, does politics affect our biodiversity? How can we handle the political class as they are the main source of destruction to our biodiversity? Does politics affect our biodiversity? And how can we handle the political class as is the main source of destruction of our biodiversity? And the third and final question for you, Dr. Mwinde, comes from Shadrach Talno. Shadrach, thank you very much for joining us. He's a journalist. I have a question for Dr. Mwinde. I would like the exact statistics of wildlife in Kenya and the entire world. He wants to know the exact statistics of all wildlife in Kenya and the entire world. I'm sure we have that somewhere. And related to that, Mwinde, I think it's important to also take this question. It's also related to statistics. It's from Naftali Muigai. So you'll have 4 questions. Naftali Muigai from Zinua News Agency. here in Nairobi, Kenya, to Dr. Muinde, please list the most traded wildlife species in Africa. That is the mammals, birds, reptiles, in that order. How many wild animals are traded at a given year, and what are the destinations? That is Naftali Mwaura, looking for statistics of the most traded species in Africa. That is mammals, birds, reptiles, in that order. How many wild animals from Africa are traded at a given year, and what are the destinations? Where do they go? Dr. Muinde, I hope you have all the questions. The 4 questions.
Yes, I did.
Thank
Yes,
you.
yes, I did.
Please
Thank
go
you,
ahead.
Lucy, and thank you all for those questions. I'll answer them as you have presented them to me. About the question about what ways to help to support protect animals from extinction. Thank you for that question. Currently, we are working to bring everyone together. We want to build a movement. We want to build people's movement to bring everyone together so that we push this agenda of protecting animals. For example, youth are all the future. The population is growing. Currently, we almost getting to 8 billion. I think we are 7.8 billion currently. By 2050, we'll be hitting almost 10 billion. And that will mean will threaten space that is currently covered by wildlife. So basically, at the moment, we are calling people together to come up to push together people-powered movement so that any new policies, any measures that are going to be taken are pro-wildlife. So one of the key things that you can start working at the moment is bring your colleagues together, bring your fellow students together to create a group so that you send the same voice to your government, and also to share pro-wildlife messaging in social media. As I mentioned, social media, it's a tool that is that can be used in the right manner, but equally misused. So you can give reactions to message to any information that you see in social media that is touching on wildlife exploitation. You can come up with movements, creating networks with other students from other universities, other colleges, to push together one voice. Then about politics, how politics affect biodiversity. Yes, politics is a big threat because politicians look for any avenue that they can use so long as they get voice from communities. For example, you have seen many issues of settlement. You have seen issues about land, which is a key issue when it comes to Africa. And you have seen politicians in a way going into wildlife habitats, creating space for community to settle in those places. Because in a way, by taking that kind of action, you are going to win the votes of the that local community. So the key thing that we are talking about is there's big loss of biodiversity, and one of the key things is clearing land, clearing bush for agriculture, for settlements, for infrastructure. Okay. Then there's another issue of climate change. So this clearing of land, it's one of the key drivers of climate change because of carbon emission, where there's a lot of science to that in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and all that. So basically, that is one of the key things. And again, I mentioned about source of income, source of revenue. Okay, politicians are the ones who put laws, regulations to govern wildlife in their countries. And as long as we keep seeing wildlife as a source of income, as we keep seeing wildlife as commodities, basically wildlife exploitation will continue. So it's a key message to politicians to come up with the laws, to review current policies and laws, and come up with new laws that are protecting wildlife, and that which do not advocate use of wildlife as commodities, that which do not advocate selling and buying of wildlife. I think my colleague, he did really put it out why in respect of legality doesn't matter. So let's not excuse ourselves to make wildlife trade illegal, because in a way, making it legality also affects, it's like creating market for illegal sourced wildlife. If we didn't legality, basically there won't be a demand, and the source countries' populations will be sustained. Wildlife population in Kenya, yes, I understand. Recently, KWS did the statistics, did census, I mean, just to count the number of wildlife that we have in the country. I understand we have some data for some key species. For example, elephants, we have, I think, around 34,000 elephants currently. Lions, we have more than 2,000 lions. Rhinos, we're almost getting to 2,000 rhinos in the country. So that data is publicly available, and it's something that I can share with you if you'll not be able to get that. And again, there's also some data on African population of wildlife species. About most traded animal species in Africa, yes, in the report that we launched, Big 5 and Little 5, basically highlights the most traded species from Africa. And in that report, you'll find species like African great parrot, ball pythons, emperor scorpions, savanna monitors. You'll find elephants. You'll find lions. You'll find hippos. You'll find Atman's mountain zebra. Yeah, so we can share with you that report, or rather you can visit our website. That report is publicly available, and basically it highlights those most legally traded species from Africa, and you'll find the source countries, those countries which exported those species, and also import countries. You'll be able to get all that information there. Thank you, and back to you, Lucy.
Okay, thank you, Mwende. Thank you so much for that. We have lots of questions. So we'll take the next round. Then after that, we'll take a break. And when we come back, we'll have the journalist section. So for the journalists who might have questions, you can reserve them for the next session, which is about 15 to 20 minutes with our panelists, and we'll answer all the questions there, and you'll also get your sound bites. And also we have the B-rolls already recorded, so we'll send the presentation and the B-rolls after this. So let's move on. We'll take 2 questions each. That is Edith and Mwende. So the next question is to Edith. This question comes from Mary Ann Ayola. Mary Ann Ayola. She is a student of ecology and wildlife conservation in Nigeria. Question is, the issue of lack of scientific data on wildlife population. What is the way out? So the question is, we lack scientific data on wildlife population across Africa. What is the way out? And perhaps what is Wild Animal Protection doing to ensure that we have enough scientific data on wildlife population? I actually guess that question should go to Patrick, because Patrick is our research manager. So that question is for Patrick. And Patrick, you'll also answer the question from Ronnie Kimani, a question from Ronnie Kimani. This is your second question. In my point of view, I believe that farming of these wild animals is beneficial to the management of wild population. The population of wild animals in our parks is declining due to poor management and corruption, as well as poaching. So Ronnie Kimani has a different view. He says, in my point of view, I believe that farming of these wild animals is beneficial to the management of wild populations. The population of wild animals in our parks is declining due to poor management and corruption, as well as poaching. We would like to hear your view, Patrick Mwende, so you can lead us with those 2 questions, and then we'll have Edith, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy, and thank you for posing those 2 questions. issue of lack of scientific data. Yes, as I mentioned, Africa is quite a diverse continent, and we are quite rich in ecosystem. We have so many wildlife species. I believe some are yet to be discovered. Of course, we have seen governments putting individual efforts to do wildlife counting, census. Like I mentioned, KWS has done census for some species. For example, elephants, lions, and many others. But it becomes a challenge. For example, to do census for some species, for example, scorpions. You can imagine trying to come up with scientific data of scorpions. Of course, you can estimate the abundance in terms of if you go to a forest, how many like distance that you can walk before you locate one and all that. So it's also poses a challenge to come up with this scientific data. But one of the main issue is effort from government. If African governments came out to do, put some resources to collect some scientific data on wildlife populations, that will really help. As an organization, we do a lot of research. For example, I mentioned the data that we launched a while back, which basically highlighted the most threatened species from Africa. We had to look at such data for 5 years just to come up with that list. So as an organization, we try as much as we can to get real-time data to know where we are in terms of wildlife population. And the key ask and the key message that we are sending is, let's stop trading on wildlife, because basically we are trading on something that we don't know its abundance in the forest. So you can trade up to a point where you are not able to trade anymore. For example, one of the stories that we got from West Africa when we are doing data collection is that a few years back, it was so easy to locate ball pythons. Like when you go to your garden or when you are grazing your cows, it was so easy to locate some. But currently, it's quite hard to locate one. And that is an indicator how over-harvesting of this species from the world has led to decline of its population in the world. Then going to the farming question, farming is beneficial to world population because of issue of poor management and corruption for the world. One of the first question is, for what reasons are you doing farming? You are doing it from the business point of view, okay? Because you are doing it to trade on wildlife, okay? And basically, as I mentioned, some farming practices, for example, when you come to ranching facilities, they are sustained by wild population, especially when you're looking for primary stock. You go to the wildlife, you get a pregnant reptile, pregnant snake, you bring it to your facility, it gives birth, then you take it back, okay? So basically that ranching facility is sustained by wildlife population. And equally, it's so hard to translate wildlife and environment, wildlife climate, wildlife interactions into a facility that does farming. Animals, they interact, they are social, they migrate. For example, lions migrate thousands of kilometers. They have a big habitat range. We know elephants migrate thousands of kilometers, and just restraining them to a captive facility basically is causing a lot of suffering in that facility, because they cannot explore how they ought to explore. So farming is no solution at all, and the only solution is just keeping these animals in the world so that they can have a life that is worth living. Of course, poaching is a big challenge, as you mentioned, but what is the root cause of this poaching? You're poaching because you have business, and this business is coming from the legality to trade in some species. Believe me, if trade of wildlife, if there was no market for wildlife products, these wild animals will not be poached. And we see one of the key drivers is authorizing trade of this wildlife and seeing farming as a solution to be the source of traded animals. So basically, in a way, farming creates avenue for poaching. And as Edith mentions, it's so hard to differentiate a species that has been sourced, or derivative that has been sourced from the wild and that has been sourced from captivity. So in a nutshell, keeping these wild animals in the wild is the only practical solution that doesn't require a lot of investment, as you might think, into farming, and just protecting these animals and their habitats will ensure we don't experience any extinctions or threats of extinctions in the future. I can use example of Kenya. Back in 1970s, they banned trade of ivory. And through banning trophy hunting, I've seen population of elephant grow to a level of 34,000 elephants today. And that number is increasing. Just because the government saw, yes, we should not go in trophy hunting, we should not encourage that, let's ban it and let's see what happens. So that is one of the practical ways. I know there are so many examples outside there in other countries that you can use, but I think it's high time we clicked our mind and take a view of protecting wildlife in the world. I think those will be my responses, and I'll hand it over to you, Lucy. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mwinde. We are approaching the end of the session. So we have Edith, you'll only have one question, and then you give your closing remarks. And then we take a break, 2 minutes, so that you can have a glass of water, and then we come back for the journalist session. One question, Edith, coming from an anonymous attendee. I think if people know that trading wildlife is also a risk to them, it will help reduce exploitation of wildlife. What is the most effective method to make sure that the people know the risks of trading in wildlife? So I think if people know that trading wildlife is also a risk to them, it will help reduce exploitation of wildlife. What is the most effective method to make it known to them that actually trading in wildlife is a risk to themselves? Edith, you can take that and then you do the wrap up.
Thank you, Lucy, and of course, thank you, Anonymous, for that interesting question. You know, one of the drivers of wildlife exploitation is our mindset and our belief systems. People believing that it's okay to exploit wild animals. People who come from this society making policies that it's okay to exploit these wild animals. So in my view, and of course in the view of wild animal protection, the most effective way of making people realize that it's dangerous for them to engage in wildlife trade is changing people's mindsets. And in fact, as one of the strategies or interventions we have defined and put in place in our new 10-year strategy, educate people, change their mindsets, that actually wild animals belong in the wild, they are not commodities of trade. So in the next 10 years, we will be doing a lot of education and awareness. We will be engaging with the policymakers at different levels. We will be engaging with the communities where these wild animals reside. And of course, we will be engaging with many players in conservation, in animal welfare, especially the NGOs that share the same views with us, to really transform people's mindsets so that the dominant narrative becomes that wild animals deserve to be protected in the areas where they're supposed to be, and that is the wild. So we will focus on in people's mindsets. We will avail a lot of information. And of course, webinars like this And those that we will hold in the future are one of those channels that we can effectively communicate with the people. But of course, we know there are so many people that do not have access to the internet, like us. Then that is where we will need to go down on the ground to really spread this gospel and mobilize the people so that people realize that engaging in wildlife trade is in itself inherently dangerous to themselves. I think that is what I can say. And then in wrapping up, I want to repeat our call to action, especially targeted at the the CITES, which is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Plants and Wild Animals, that trade in wildlife is needless, especially if we look at the uses why these animals are traded. Animals are traded to be used as rugs in our city living rooms, to be hunted as trophies, to be used as medicine, which has no proven scientific efficacy that these medicines work, and also traded to be used as, for entertainment and as pets. And in our view, all these are needless uses, which can actually be done away with. And we call upon the CITES and governments really look into the CITES portals, the provisions, especially the CITES mechanism that allow these animals to be traded and scrap those mechanisms, those provisions. But we are also saying that really we should take a precautionary approach to wildlife trade. For CITES, it's like unless a species has been classified as endangered, then that's when CITES comes in. I think the honor should be on those that are people interested in trading in species, prove that actually these species are in trade, not in countries proving that actually these species are not endangered. And they're endangered, and then that is when CITES comes into play. This is what I can say in conclusion. Let's all embrace the narrative that wild animals are not commodities, but sentient individuals that deserve the right to live in the wild. Lucy.
Yes, indeed. Wildlife are sentient beings, and they need and deserve to live a better life. And that life is always only found in the world where they belong. So thank you very much, Dr. Muinde and Edith Kavensime, for taking time to explain to us as the participants about wildlife and what we can do. So we now move on to the journalist and press section, which will take just about 15 minutes. So we urge that the journalists who are on the call to please remain behind as we take a short break so that our panelists can have a glass of water. We'll be back for the next question. But before you go, we have a poll on the screen, which we urge you to respond to. We'll be sharing these poll results thereafter. So for journalists, please do post your questions at the Q&A. And please take the poll is now on the screen. And as we mentioned that, I also want to say we will be sharing the B-rolls, we'll be sharing the presentation, we'll be sharing this webinar on our Facebook, on our YouTube thereafter. And you'll also find it in your inbox so that you can always go back and check what we were saying. And we also urge you that when we start sharing the snippets, please do share on your social media channels and also on your YouTube. So we have the closing poll on the screen now. Please do answer. Just choose a single choice and have your say. So yes, we'll also have an audio clip for the people who are asking. You'll have an audio clip of this webinar, and in case you want to have a radio interview one-on-one with our panelists, we will also handle that. And Evans Kipkorio, who is our content and media officer, you'll have his contacts on the press release, provided you have left your telephone number and your email address. You'll get all these materials immediately after this. So that is the closing poll. I believe our panelists have had a glass of water now. We can move on to the journalist question session. Yeah, so I can see we have a few questions coming up right now. So if you have a question, you can also raise your hand. So we kick off the journalist question now. We have our panelists. We have Muinde on the panel, and we have Edith back on the panel, looking very refreshed to take on your questions. So if you have any question, you can raise your hand. I will unmute you, and you'll be able to ask your question. And then you can still also type on Q&A. And I can see in our Q&A, a lot of people asking for the footage and for a radio interview for the radio. You will get all that in your inbox. Please do have type your email address and your telephone number. And we'll also at some point project Evan's telephone number and email address, which you can get in touch with him. So if you have any question, I will be able to unmute you and you can ask your question live as we proceed. For our technical team, the digital team, if you have any question from our Facebook channels, you can also type the questions there, and our panelists will be able to take that question. Okay, as we wait for more questions, we have a question from Solomon Lubabula, Solomon Lubabula asks, Africa as a continent has majority of its natives with very low levels of literacy. And to them, these acts are traditional. Now, how can this be handled if even the laws themselves are subject of customary principles? It's a question about the conflict between what we know that is the traditional law and what is there now. So Africa as a continent has majority. The question is from Solomon Lubambula. Africa as a continent has majority of its natives with very low levels of literacy. And to them, these acts are traditional. I would imagine it's the acts of using or hunting animals. Now, how can this be handled if even the laws themselves are subject of customary principles? How do we match the current with the customary principles on which these laws are anchored? That is a question for Edith, the question from Solomon. And Edith, then there is this question from Nika Richards. Nika Richards from The Citizen. We have a question from Nika Richards from The Citizen. Nika asks, countries need to prioritize species that are critically endangered, but at the same time, trophy hunting quotas such as those in South Africa include animals that are endangered or are critically endangered. This is all in pursuit of for-profit. How can we balance poverty and biodiversity? So it's another question on balance coming from Nika Richards from The Citizen. Countries need to prioritize species that are critically endangered, but at some point, trophy hunting quotas, such as those in South Africa, include animals that are endangered or are critically endangered. This is all in pursuit for profit. How do we balance poverty and biodiversity? How to balance poverty and biodiversity? We can go with those two questions for you, Edith, then we take another two for Patrick. Edith, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy, for those two questions. And I begin with the Solomon's question about literacy, low levels of literacy in Africa, and also the fact that exploiting or using wild animals in Africa is a historical practice. It's a cultural practice in some places. Of course, we all know very well that not all cultural practices, again, are correct. There will be harmful cultural practices, but there will also be harmless ones, and there will also be beneficial ones. And over time, the writing is on the wall that we have lost the biggest proportion of our wildlife. For instance, if we are talking about lions, over a century ago, lions were in millions across Africa. But as we speak now, we are talking of a handful of a few thousands of wild lions, in the wild. So, of course, we cannot blame all that on the cultural practices like hunting lions or hunting wild animals. I think the biggest threat to Africa's wildlife has not been subsistence exploitation. I think, in my view, the biggest threat has been the commodification of wildlife exploitation. Because traditionally, Africans lived and depended on wildlife through hunting, and this hunting was local. It was for domestic use. It wasn't at a scale that we are seeing today, where millions and trillions of animals are exploited on an annual basis. to be able to meet the international markets. So it is when the trade or the practice became commercialized that we have seen these declines. We are talking of over 500,000 reptiles having been exported from West Africa to the rest of the world, just to be used as pets, to be used, they are still to be used as in the fashion industry, and so on and so forth. If you compare that maybe with the century or even 50 years ago, I think the situation was different. So in a nutshell, I think we need to go back to the basics. We need to reset the clock and remove commercialization of wildlife out of the equation. Remove commercialization of wildlife use out of the equation. Because originally Africans depended on wildlife for just a few things, and they lived in harmony with the wildlife. And I think we need to reset the clock. We need to reset that balance so that species can begin to take their place as it were in the beginning. That is my take. Of course, there is the disharmony between the current legal regimes vis-a-vis the African and cultural beliefs and African legal regimes. And again, as I said, I think we need to scrutinize the current legal regimes. Who are they serving and who are they benefiting? Is it the poor African, the poor person on the African continent, or they are serving other people? I think that is where we need the conversation needs to go. But in all this, again, I want to reiterate that we need to set this law. Go back to the basics. Remove commercialization out of the equation. And then biodiversity conservation vis-a-vis poverty. I think I touched this point in the earlier set of the questions. Poverty has many dimensions. Some of the dimensions is lack of education, but also some of the dimension poverty is lack of assets for people to live on, for people to live dignified life. And I don't think we can look at biodiversity as the magic bullet to get Africans or other people across the world, fewer people out of poverty. I talked of skills, building people's skills as a way of addressing the poverty question, and really not look at biodiversity as the sole route through which we can get people out of poverty. In my presentation, I talked about South Africa as one of those countries which is now beginning to move away from raising lions for trade, really to rewilding lions so that they can ecologically be utilized in ways that will not exploit them in their natural environment. I mentioned that ecotourism is one of those models that can be adopted and to address the poverty question. As World Animal Protection, of course, we don't subscribe to trophy hunting, and we are calling upon those countries that are looking at engaged in trophy hunting, as actually the solution is not in trophy hunting, but in using wild animals in their natural habitats through models such as ecotourism, photograph-based tourism, where people come and look at wild animals and leave them in their habitats. Of course, in some of the countries, especially in Southern Africa, where trophy hunting is prevalent, they will tell you that their animal numbers are increasing. Therefore, they have no reason not to trade or to export elephants, say outside of Namibia, other countries. But if you look at the African continent as a whole, then the picture is gloomy. So instead of say carrying animals out of say Namibia and you're taking them to China, which is not their range, which is not one of their range states, why not? If really it's about conservation, why not restore some of the range countries in Africa where these animals originally existed, but then they have dwindled because of course, practices such as poaching, but also legalized exploitation. We have many protected areas across Africa, which originally were teeming with elephants, which were teeming with rhinos, which were teeming with lions. So really, it's inconceivable to imagine that you would invest in carrying over 50 elephants out of Namibia or Botswana and take them to China, where they will be put in rules, meaning they will live a life in captivity forever. And then we have these empty spaces in Africa in national parks, which are devoid of those species. I think it's high time that African governments sat together and thought about how do we restock our continent so that we stop this hemorrhage of wild animals being taken out of Africa and being used in captivity, where actually other countries benefit much more when they receive products to use those animals.
Okay, thank you, Edith. I think we have lost Edith. If I'm not wrong, so we move to the final questions, and we have two. And thanks to all of you who has submitted your email address and your telephone number. We will get this documents and materials over to you as we finish, and also our media officer Evans will be at hand to help with any one-on-one interviews. So the final question is for you, Dr. Patrick Muinde, as we end, because we are at the top of the hour, as we end the webinar. The question comes from an anonymous attendee. The question is, how has wildlife exploitation led to the epidemics and pandemics that we have faced? How has wildlife exploitation led to the epidemics and pandemics that we have faced? So Dr. Muinde, you take that question, because the others are actually comments and a request for the footage. So please take that question and you give your final word as we wrap up. Over to you, Muinde.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy, and thanks to the person who posed that question. It's quite relevant to our current situation. If you are to be hacked in 2018, that you will be required to wear a mask as you walk around. You won't be shaking hands with your friends. You will not believe that kind of situation will happen when you are still alive. And again, no one could have believed there will be an incident that will happen in the globe to prevent aviation industry from operating. But here we are. And we are in this situation because of interaction, our interaction and exploitation of wildlife. COVID-19 started at one location, one area, that is Wuhan in China. It is started in traditional wildlife market, traditional wet market, whereby different species of wildlife are sold. I don't know if you followed my presentation, but what you find in those markets, you find different species stacked on top of each other. What they do, they urinate, they defecate on top of each other, and in a way that creates an environment for organisms to evolve, to mutate, and possibly spill over to humans. And again, studies have shown that up to 60% of current diseases are zoonotic. Okay, that means they can be spread from animals, from wildlife to humans. And again, if you look at the future, the projections are 70% of emerging infectious diseases are predicted to originate from wildlife. Okay, and basically that is going to happen because of our close proximity with wildlife, either going to their habitats or even trafficking them and selling them in wildlife wet markets. And again, if you look at previously some of major pandemics that we have had, if you look at, for example, SARS-CoV-1, that is severe acute respiratory syndrome that happened in 2002. It is associated with civet cats. And again, you know MERS-CoV, you know Ebola, which is associated with bats. And as recent as last year, we were able to identify some of these high-risk mammals. When you talk of bats, when you talk of civet cats, when you talk of primates, we found those high-risk mammals are still being traded to supply wildlife market outside Africa. You are trading on something that is already documented to be reservoirs of dangerous pathogens. So this kind of exploitation, this kind of close interaction is a key source of current and future pandemics. And again, other aspect that is not being looked at, bushmeat consumption. We are consuming bushmeat. This meat is containing maybe organisms that can as well mutate and spill over to humans. So exploitation of wildlife and also destruction of habitats. Because what happens if you destroy habitats, basically you are destroying ecosystem, and basically everything, including organisms, they have to change. They are going to mutate so that they can adapt to the current ecosystem climatic conditions. Because basically it's survival for the fittest. Everyone and every species, may it be large, may it be small, may it be bacteria, virus, is trying to survive in the current conditions. So basically, our destruction of ecosystems, clearing land, exploitation of wildlife is leading to emergence of new diseases, which are infectious and being spread to humans. So it's just the right time. COVID-19 is happening. It's basically happening at the right time when we should rethink how we handle animals. And again, a recent guidance report by tripartite, that is WHO, OIE, and UNEP, gave direction to suspend trade of live mammals in wildlife markets, because that has been identified as a big, as high biosecurity risk for emergence of diseases. So as I conclude, my position and also position of that of world animal protection is we need to excuse ourselves from a legal aspect of things, saying anyway we can trade on wildlife because it's illegal. Being legal doesn't make it right. You cannot differentiate. For example, I can use the example of bone, like land bones are being traded for traditional Chinese medicine. I cannot give you a bone, I tell you this is from the wild and this is from captivity. You won't be able to differentiate the two. And also because of legality, it's creating avenues for poaching, okay? People are poaching because there's market for that given species or that given derivative. And again, conservation efforts will not bear fruit if trade continues, because we don't know status of these species in the world. We are just trading on them. We don't know if they are declining. We don't know if they're increasing. We don't know what is happening in the destination countries where they are going. So the key call is we must stop viewing wildlife as commodities. We must stop viewing them as something that must bring money to us, and change that to a protective way of, point of view, and respect them as sentient beings, and also allow them to live in the world where they are able to explore their potential and also help maintain ecosystems in those areas. And I think those would be my final remarks. And thank you so much, Lucy. I hand it back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mwinde, indeed for that clarion call that we remain and leave animals in the world. And I can see we have Edith back. We have lots and lots of questions, my dear participants, but I'm afraid we will not be able to answer all of them. But we will do that a little later and on your specific email. So you bear with us. Lots of questions coming in now. But Edith will take the final one from Paul Rubega. And then Edith, you'll give your final remarks as we wind up. And so we are still saying you can type in your questions. You can also send us an email. We'll have a slide on the emails that you can get us on. We will also be able to answer your questions there. So final question is from Paul Umbega. For Lumbega, what's your take on Sharjah Safari in United Arab Emirates, where they have established a park with almost all animals from the African park, over 120 animal species? So Paul asks, what is your take on the Sharjah Safari in UAE, United Arab Emirates, where they have established a park with almost all animals from the African park, with over 120 species? And I think, Edith, it's not just this park. There are many parks, other parks across the world that keep animals in confinement. What is your take, and what is World Animal Protection stand on animals in captivity as a whole, as you make your final standing? Edith, over to you.
Thank you, Lucy, for that very last question. Of course, certainly our stand as World Animal Protection on animals in captivity is very clear. If it's commercial, it's needless. And we know very well that almost such parks across the world are for commercial purposes. They are for exploiting these animals. They are putting these animals at risk. Animals suffer in those confinement, places of confinement. And our stand is that it is needless. If those parks are not for conservation purposes, then it is needless. Our stand is as clear as that. And of course, my final word, I must say that my colleague Mwinde has really wrapped it up very well. Animals belong in the wild, and that is where they should be. As human beings, we can't continue putting their lives at risk, and we cannot afford to continue putting our lives at risk because of all the risks that are associated with exploiting wild animals. So let's leave wild animals where they belong, and that is the wild.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Edith. Thank you, Mwinde. And thank you for making this a reality, for joining our first very interactive webinar. I thank you for all your comments, your questions, and indeed your presence. Please, let's continue the conversation on our social media channels, that is Twitter, Facebook. We are also on YouTube, and now on Instagram and LinkedIn. So please look for our handles there and follow us, give us any comments, and follow our work and get to learn more how you can participate. Indeed, you can participate even just by liking, sharing our comment and our post, and doing something this World Wildlife Day that is happening tomorrow. Please go out. If you are a journalist, you can write a tweet, you can write an article, you can broadcast this webinar to your audience or in your media house. And by so doing, you have made a big contribution to saving our wildlife and ensuring that their welfare is well taken care of. So from all of us here at World Animal Protection is bye-bye. Remember to keep the conversation going on our social media channels. So thank you very much. Have a beautiful World Wildlife Day tomorrow, go out and do something for animals because they are sentient beings and they matter. Thank you very much. As we exit, we'll have our poll results. Thank you and join us next time.
At World Animal Protection, we know that every animal counts. We're a global animal welfare organisation and have been campaigning for over 50 years to end animal cruelty. We work to achieve global change. Every day, billions of animals are experiencing unbearable cruelty. We tackle the root causes of their suffering so that we can make the biggest difference to their lives. We give a voice to the voiceless. Our world is changing fast. As people face urgent issues like the climate emergency and depleting natural resources, we give animals a voice and ensure their needs are met because we all call our planet home. Right now, we're prioritising issues where change can transform the lives of the greatest number of animals, overhauling the global food system. And ending the cruel exploitation of our planet's wildlife. We know that the fate of animals' lives rests in our hands. Our passionate teams inspire and mobilise individuals and organisations to create change. We support local and global movements that are fighting for a better future for animals. Our knowledge and expertise give us a powerful voice at the government and business, where we establish animal welfare as a global priority and a local concern. Though the challenge is great, our determination is greater.
Oh, yeah. Sasa ni change tu sahi. Kwa jamaa alisound alikuwa na haraka. kumsikia. Huyo jamaa alikuwa na speed, hata mimi nilidoubt kama atanini.
So ndo najaribu kuwafikia na naona wataanza kutukombat na text. Any journalist, everyone's audio, everyone's video.
Sound very patient.